I was on my way to the meeting about my husband's inheritance, and the September air in Cleveland felt heavy with rain, as if the sky itself knew something ominous was about to unfold. Richard had been gone for 3 months, and I had barely found the strength to put on my navy blazer that morning, the one he always said made me look dignified. My hands trembled as I locked the front door, clutching the worn leather folder that contained every document the lawyer said I needed to sign. This meeting was supposed to close a chapter to settle the estate Richard had left behind after 35 years of marriage. I thought it would be painful but straightforward. I was wrong. The parking garage smelled of damp concrete and gasoline when I pulled in. My car's headlights bounced off gray pillars, and my heart pounded louder than the engine as I eased into a space. I killed the ignition and reached for my folder, whispering a small prayer to myself. That was when I heard a voice, low but urgent, cutting through the stillness. "Ma'am, please wait." I froze, my pulse racing. Out from behind a cracked pillar stepped a man in his early 60s, hair, long and graying beard, unkempt, wearing a faded army jacket 2 sizes too big. His eyes, though, were startlingly sharp, almost frantic with worry. "Please don't go up there," he said, his voice trembling with something that was not weakness but conviction. I gripped the handle of my car door tighter, fear colliding with instinct. A stranger here in this deserted garage. My first thought was Richard's warning, "Always trust your gut, Margaret," and my gut screamed danger. But then he said the words that turned my blood to ice. "Your daughter-in-law has been planning this for months. Do not sign anything today." I felt the folder slip slightly from my grasp. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, the same young woman who had smiled sweetly at me across Sunday dinners, who had sat at Richard's hospital bed and dabbed his forehead with a wet cloth, was suddenly cast as a conspirator in a scheme I couldn't yet fathom. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended, trying to project strength I didn't feel. The man stepped back, raising both hands in a gesture of peacekeeping distance. "My name is Harold Miller," he said quickly. "I used to work for Carter and Lowe, the firm you're meeting with today. They fired me 3 weeks ago because I knew too much. Too much about the way your daughter-in-law has been working with certain people inside to strip you of your rights." My throat went dry, and for a second the world tilted. Strip me of my rights. The word sounded unreal, absurd, like something from a cheap television drama. But his eyes were steady, not the eyes of a liar. "Why should I believe you?" I whispered. But deep down the question was directed at myself, at the unease I had buried for months as Vanessa tightened her grip over my son Daniel and hovered over every financial conversation after Richard's death. Harold's voice dropped lower. "They are going to present you with documents claiming you are no longer mentally fit to handle Richard's estate. They've forged medical reports. They've even drafted a trust that puts everything under Vanessa's control. The only thing left for you will be a small allowance enough to keep you quiet, while she and your son use the rest to pay off debts." My knees buckled, and I leaned against the car door to steady myself. This was madness, but a memory struck me sharp and unwelcome. Just last week, Vanessa had smiled sympathetically when I forgot where I placed my reading glasses and whispered to Daniel, "She's been so forgetful lately." I had brushed it off as nothing. Now it felt like a warning I had failed to read. My chest tightened with betrayal and disbelief. Harold glanced around, nerves prickling. "I have evidence," he said quickly, his hand hovering near a battered leather satchel slung across his shoulder. "But you need to be careful. They are not expecting you to ask questions today. They think grief has made you weak. Prove them wrong." The sound of an elevator ding echoed in the distance, pulling me back into the moment. Harold faded into the shadows, leaving me trembling, my mind spinning, my heart pounding with dread. I clutched the folder tighter, whispering Richard's name under my breath. This meeting was no longer about signatures and closure. It was about survival. When I finally stepped into the driver's seat and started the car, the steering wheel felt colder than metal should feel, almost hostile, as if it were absorbing the fear that ran through me. My husband Richard had always driven us to every appointment, every dinner, every trip to the store. He used to tease me about being too nervous behind the wheel. Now here I was, 58 years old, a widow with trembling hands on the wheel, and for the first time in my life I wished he was here to tell me everything was going to be all right. Richard had been gone for 92 days, and I still counted each one. 35 years of marriage doesn't end with a funeral. It lingers in the small, silent rituals. The empty side of the bed where his pillow no longer held the faint smell of aftershave. The half-empty mug in the cupboard that no one touched. The newspaper he used to fold just so with the crossword penciled in faint handwriting. Those things screamed his absence more than the gravestone did. The estate meeting was supposed to finalize Richard's wishes. He had been meticulous, a man who built our life with care and order. His plan was always straightforward after his passing. Everything our two-story home in Cleveland, the $750,000 in savings and investments, his modest share in a logistics company, would transfer to me with provisions that after my time our son Daniel would inherit. Richard trusted me with everything because he knew I was steady, careful, and not swayed by impulse. That's why the stranger's words gnawed at me. If Harold was telling the truth, someone was trying to twist Richard's clarity into confusion. The thought of Vanessa's face came to me. Her delicate features, the blonde hair always pinned perfectly. Her voice sweet as syrup when she said, "Don't worry, Mom, we'll take care of everything." The problem was that phrase "will take care" had begun to sound less like comfort and more like control. I met Vanessa 7 years ago when Daniel brought her home for Thanksgiving. She was 24, working as an assistant at a law office, all smiles and politeness. Richard liked her immediately, though I remember feeling an odd stiffness beneath her charm, as though every word she spoke was rehearsed. But Daniel adored her. They married within 2 years. Richard and I told ourselves she was young, that time would soften her edges. I wanted to believe it. Yet over the past year, especially after Richard's diagnosis, Vanessa had slipped into the role of manager of everything. She sat beside Richard in the hospital, but it was she who asked the doctors the questions, she who kept Daniel from breaking down, she who gathered the mail and reminded me about bills. At first, I thought it was kindness, but looking back, I realized it was rehearsed positioning. Slowly, she replaced me in conversations that once belonged to Richard and me. She spoke of the estate as if it were already hers to control. Daniel, my only child, had always been sensitive, bright but easily overwhelmed. His consulting business had never thrived the way he promised it would. He worked late hours, invested recklessly, and Vanessa's lifestyle seemed to drain more than it sustained. They had a house in Westfield, 2 cars they could barely afford, and vacations that somehow appeared on Instagram, even though the bills piled up at home. I suspected trouble, but Daniel never admitted it. He carried himself with pride, as if confessing failure would tarnish the Collins name Richard had worked so hard to build. Harold's warning now connected those dots. Vanessa was steering Daniel into desperation, and desperation bred schemes. As I drove through traffic construction cones slowing me at every turn, I thought about the way Vanessa had watched me lately. Not with affection, but with calculation. Her eyes lingered on me when I fumbled for my purse, when I hesitated, remembering a date when I misplaced Richard's reading glasses. Little things, human things, magnified into signs of weakness. Daniel never questioned her observations. He believed her because she said them softly like she cared, while planting seeds of doubt. Maybe Mom is getting older. Maybe she does need help. By the time I reached downtown Cleveland, my chest felt tight. I parked the car, checked my folder 3 times, and sat there with the engine off staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked older than I felt grief carving lines around my mouth. Richard's absence made me smaller, and Vanessa had noticed. The truth was, I was afraid. Afraid not of being poor, I could live with less, but of losing Richard's final act of trust. He had wanted me to have control, to live with dignity. If Vanessa managed to take that away, it would mean his faith in me was stolen, twisted into something ugly. I gathered myself and stepped out of the car, heels echoing against the pavement. The Carter and Lowe building loomed above polished glass and stone, a monument to money and power. I had been here before with Richard for small legal matters. Back then, it seemed like a place of professionalism. Today, after Harold's warning, it felt like a trap. As I walked toward the entrance, memories of Richard filled me like a tide. His laugh when Daniel was born. His steady voice telling me not to worry during our hardest years. His determination to save every dollar so we would never depend on anyone. He would want me strong. He would want me to fight. The lobby doors opened with a hiss, releasing a wave of cool air that smelled faintly of leather and polish. I tightened my grip on the folder and whispered to myself, "Not today, Vanessa. Not today." The lobby was brighter than I remembered, sunlight bouncing off polished marble floors, chandeliers glimmering overhead, but none of that eased the heaviness pressing down on my chest. I checked in at the desk, the receptionist offering a smile, too wide, too practiced, as though she already knew the script of my day. She gestured toward the elevators, her voice lilting. "They are expecting you, Mrs. Collins, 12th floor, expecting me." The phrase echoed in my ears, hollow and suspicious. My hand trembled as I pressed the button, and when the doors closed around me, I caught a glimpse of my own face in the mirrored panel, pale drawn eyes wide with a fear I tried to suppress. Harold's words replayed relentlessly. "They have forged documents. They want you to look incompetent. They think grief has made you weak." The elevator hummed numbers ticking upward, and I gripped the railing, whispering Richard's name under my breath. When the door slid open, the hallway stretched long and silent, lined with closed doors, muffled voices seeping from behind them. I walked slowly, every footstep echoing, and reached conference room B. Through the frosted glass, I could see silhouettes, two men in suits, my son's familiar frame, and the distinct outline of Vanessa, her blonde hair pinned in that severe bun she favored. My stomach knotted. I stood there, hand on the brass handle, and hesitated. For a moment, I almost turned back, almost ran to the elevator, almost chose ignorance over confrontation. But Richard's voice came to me again, firm, steady. "You are stronger than you know, Margaret. You fight when it matters." And it mattered now. I pushed the door open. They looked up as one. Daniel's face softened with relief. "Mom, you're here," as if he had doubted I would come. Vanessa's expression flickered just for a fraction of a second's surprise, maybe even fear, before she smoothed it over with a saccharine smile. "Oh, Margaret, we weren't sure you'd make it today," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. I forced a calm I didn't feel. "Of course I am here. This is about Richard's estate." One of the lawyers, a gray-haired man with eyes cold as steel, gestured to a chair. "Please, Mrs. Collins, have a seat. We have some documents for your review." My eyes flicked to Vanessa, who sat too straight, her hands folded neatly, but her fingers twitching at the wedding ring she spun on her finger. I knew nerves when I saw them. They slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were medical records, written statements, and an amendment to Richard's will. As I scanned the top page, my breath caught. It claimed I had displayed signs of memory loss, confusion with finances, difficulty managing household tasks. One line written in handwriting I recognized as Vanessa's stabbed me like a knife. Margaret became agitated when asked about bills, accused Daniel of trying to control her money. That was a lie. I slammed the folder shut, my voice low but trembling with fury. "This is false. Richard never questioned my ability. I have never accused my son of anything." Vanessa leaned forward, her blue eyes wide, performing concern. "Margaret, please, we've all been worried. You've been under so much stress. Richard wanted to protect you. That's why these changes were made." "Changes?" I snapped. "What changes?" The gray-haired lawyer cleared his throat. "Your husband amended his will to establish a trust. Daniel and Vanessa would serve as trustees, ensuring your care with a generous allowance of $45,000 annually. The rest of the estate would be managed for stability and debt resolution." The room swam. An allowance, $45,000, while they controlled the remainder of nearly $800,000. Richard would never have done this. He trusted me. My voice cracked, but I straightened, refusing to let them see me crumble. Before I could demand proof, a knock interrupted. The secretary peeked in, nervous. "Mr. Lowe, there's a man here, says his name is Harold Miller. He insists it's urgent." Vanessa stiffened, color drained from her face. "I don't know anyone by that name," she blurted too quickly, voice pitched high. "Tell him we're busy." "No," I said, rising slowly, keeping my eyes on her. "I would like to hear what he has to say." Vanessa's lips parted, ready to protest, but the door opened before she could stop it. Harold stepped inside, cleaner now than in the garage, but still worn around the edges, his leather satchel slung over his shoulder. He nodded at me respectfully, then turned to the lawyers. Gentlemen, forgive the intrusion, but this meeting is fraudulent and I have evidence. Lowe shot up from his chair, face red. Sir, you're trespassing. Security will escort you out. Harold's calm voice cut through the air. Call them if you want. But first, Mrs. Collins deserves the truth. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folder. These are the original documents. The real will Richard Collins signed 6 months before his death. The real medical reports from his physician. And records of payments made by Vanessa Collins to this firm for the purpose of altering legal documents. The silence was deafening. My heart thundered in my ears as he laid the papers before me. My husband's familiar signature flowed across the page in ink I recognized. No amendments, no trust, just his clear intention. Everything to me exactly as he always promised. Vanessa gasped, her face pale. She clutched Daniel's arm, her nails digging into him. He looked confused, horrified, torn between his wife and his mother. Vanessa stammered, "That's not, we thought." Her voice cracked. Harold added, "She's been planning this for months, forging, manipulating, planting lies about your memory. And these men," he gestured at the lawyers, "took her money to make it official." Lowe spluttered outrageous accusations. But Harold opened another envelope, copies of invoices, dates, amount $75,000 in legal fees, all from Vanessa's account. My breath shook as I turned to Daniel. "Son, look at this. Your wife paid them to erase me." Daniel's face drained of color. He pulled his arm from Vanessa's grasp, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Is this true?" Vanessa's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, streaking mascara. "We had no choice," she whispered. "The business is failing. The house, the cars, the debts, we're drowning. We needed the inheritance." "You wanted to steal it," I said coldly, cutting through her excuses. "Not needed. Wanted." My voice trembled with rage but carried the weight of truth. Richard's trust in me was not for sale. Vanessa collapsed back into her chair, sobbing, her mask of perfection shattered. Daniel buried his face in his hands, whispering, "Oh God, oh God." Harold's voice was steady. "This is fraud, Mrs. Collins. You can press charges. And you should." I nodded, my decision crystallizing. For Richard, for myself, for the truth. The silence in the conference room was suffocating. The documents Harold placed on the table glared up at us like undeniable witnesses, their ink still sharp, their dates precise, their signatures unmistakable. For a long moment, no one moved. Daniel's hand shook as he pushed the invoices away from him, as though they burned. Vanessa sat rigid, tears streaming her breath, hitching in shallow bursts. But even in her despair, her eyes darted nervously toward the door, as if she was still calculating an escape. Lowe cleared his throat, forcing his voice into a calm tone that could not mask the tremor underneath. "Mrs. Collins, I understand this is upsetting. Perhaps we should take a break, reconvene another time when emotions aren't so high." I turned my gaze on him, icy and unflinching. "You wanted me to sign away Richard's wishes. You wanted me to accept lies as truth. There will be no break. There will be no delay. Harold, please continue." Harold opened another file, his weathered fingers steady despite the stakes. "These," he said, sliding copies across the polished wood, are internal emails. Correspondence between Vanessa Collins and Mr. Lowe's associate, Mr. Carter. They discuss creating medical documentation claiming Margaret Collins displayed symptoms of dementia. They reference staged photographs, casual incidents twisted into supposed evidence. Vanessa gasped audibly, "No, those weren't supposed to." She cut herself off, realizing too late she had confirmed their authenticity. My heart clenched, the words dementia and unfit carved into me like knives. I remembered every instance Vanessa had smiled while pointing out my supposed lapses. The time I put coffee in the refrigerator instead of the pantry. The time I hesitated, recalling the name of a new neighbor. The time I misplaced Richard's glasses. Harmless human errors twisted into a narrative of decline. Daniel lifted his head, eyes, red voice cracking. "Vanessa, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't use my mother's grief as evidence against her." Vanessa sobbed harder, but her silence was louder than any denial. Detective Harris chose that moment to step forward. I had not noticed him enter, but there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, his badge gleaming at his belt. He had been waiting just outside Harold's backup, and now he spoke with the calm authority of law. Mrs. Collins, I have been briefed by Mr. Miller. We have sufficient grounds to open a criminal investigation today. Fraud, forgery, conspiracy. These are not small matters. Low blustered detective, this is highly irregular. These documents may have been stolen. They cannot be considered valid. Harris's sharp eyes cut into him. Stolen or preserved by a man who knew you were breaking the law. We'll let the courts decide. Vanessa clutched Daniel's arm again, whispering frantically. We did this for us, for our future. Daniel recoiled, his face contorting with disgust. Our future. By destroying my mother's present, by erasing my father's last words. Vanessa's mask shattered, and her voice rose shrill, desperate. You don't understand, Daniel, we were drowning. Your business is failing, the creditors are circling, the vacations, the house, the cars, they're all mortgaged, maxed out. Without this money, we're finished. I slammed my palm on the table, the sound cracking like thunder. Finished. Richard worked his whole life so we would never be finished. He saved, he sacrificed, he trusted me. And you thought you could strip that trust away with lies. Vanessa flinched, as if struck. Daniel buried his head in his hands. Lowe tried again, his voice oily measured. Mrs. Collins, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. Intentions may not have been clear. If we renegotiate, if we arrange enough. I cut him off. No more excuses, no more lies. Detective, what do we do now? Harris nodded, pulling out his phone. We document everything. We take sworn statements. We seize the fraudulent papers. And we prepare charges. The room seemed to shrink as the weight of his words settled. Vanessa slumped, her sobs now hollow, her once polished appearance unraveling strand by strand. Daniel whispered, voice breaking, How could you, Vanessa? How could you make me doubt my own mother? She turned to him, eyes wild. Because you never told her the truth. You never admitted how deep the debts went. I had to fix it. I had to protect us. Protect us! Daniel roared, standing so suddenly his chair clattered to the floor. You tried to protect us by destroying her, by destroying everything my father left behind. The eruption stunned the room. Vanessa shrank back, truly small. For the first time, her power evaporated. Lowe muttered, Detective, surely we can resolve this quietly. Harris ignored him, already snapping photographs of the documents with his phone, securing evidence. I sat there, heart pounding, torn between rage and sorrow. My son was broken, betrayed by the woman he loved. My husband's memory had been twisted into a weapon against me. And yet, sitting across from me, Harold's steady presence reminded me that truth had allies. I turned to him. Why did you do this for me? You barely knew Richard, barely knew me. Harold's expression softened. Because I knew what they were doing was wrong. Because your husband was always kind when he came into the office. And because a conscience is worth more than a paycheck. His words struck deep, pulling tears to my eyes, but I held them back. This was not the time to weep. This was the time to stand. Harris gathered the documents, sealing them in evidence envelopes. Mrs. Collins, he said, we will need you to provide a formal statement at the station. But rest assured the law is on your side. Vanessa whimpered, Daniel, please say something. Help me. Daniel's eyes bloodshot and wet lifted to hers with a mixture of grief and fury. I don't know who you are anymore. The Vanessa I married would never have done this. Maybe that Vanessa never existed. The words landed like a verdict. Vanessa sagged, defeated, her shoulders collapsing inward. Lowe muttered legal jargon, but his voice was drowned by the sound of Harris calling for backup, his radio crackling with confirmation. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but unbroken. For months, I had felt the ground shifting under me, subtle manipulations, whispered doubts, small humiliations. Today, the truth had cracked open the facade, exposing rot beneath. Richard's voice seemed to whisper from somewhere deep inside me. You did it, Margaret. You stood your ground. The conference room that once felt like a trap now felt like a battleground I had survived. But I knew the war was not yet over. Courtrooms, depositions, headlines, they would come. The damage to my family was real, and healing it would be harder than punishing the guilty. Still, for the first time since Richard's death, I felt something stir inside me. Not just grief, not just fear, strength, unyielding strength. Detective Harris's radio chatter faded as two uniformed officers arrived at the conference room door, their presence filling the space with an undeniable authority that no polished lawyer could brush aside. Lowe tried to speak again, but his words stumbled hollow now that the weight of law pressed down. Vanessa clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her perfect manicure chipped at the edges from nervous gnawing. Her breathing came fast, and uneven mascara streaking down her cheeks, until her face looked like a mask melting under heat. I sat still, spine straight, refusing to let her chaos draw me in. This was her collapse, not mine. Harold stood silently, arms crossed, his presence steady, his eyes on me, as if reminding me I was not alone in this room of predators. The first officer began gathering the fraudulent documents Harris had identified, slipping them carefully into evidence bags. Lowe protested weakly. "That is privileged information, protected by attorney-client confidentiality." Harris snapped his gaze toward him, firm and unflinching. "Privilege does not cover criminal fraud, Mr. Lowe. You know that as well as I do." "Sit down." Lowe sat, the authority in Harris's voice flattening him like a hammer on tin. My gaze shifted to Vanessa, who rocked slightly in her chair, eyes darting toward Daniel as if searching for salvation. "Daniel, please," she whispered, voice high and desperate. "We can fix this. We can talk to them. We can explain." Daniel's eyes were wet, his jaw clenched so tight it seemed carved from stone. "Explain," he said, his voice hoarse. "Explain how you lied to me, how you lied about my mother, how you took my father's name and twisted it. Explain how you forged documents, bribed lawyers, and made me believe my own mother was losing her mind." Vanessa's sobs shook her whole frame. "I did it for us. She insisted, for our survival. Without this money, we had nothing. You call that survival?" Daniel's voice rose, trembling with fury and heartbreak. "That is theft. That is betrayal. You were supposed to be my wife, my partner. Instead, you became a stranger, plotting against the only family I have left." He turned toward me, his eyes brimming with regret. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know she had gone this far." I nodded, my heart aching. But the pain was layered grief for Richard, rage at Vanessa, sorrow for my son, who had been caught in this web of deceit. "I believe you didn't know, Daniel," I said softly, "but I also believe you let her voice become louder than mine. You believed her when she painted me weak." Daniel flinched, shame breaking across his face. Vanessa lunged, then grabbing his sleeve, her voice cracking. "They'll ruin us, Daniel. If they charge us, if this goes to court, we'll lose everything. Please help me." Daniel yanked his arm free, his voice like thunder. "We already lost everything the moment you decided to betray my mother." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. She swayed, her face ghostly pale, and then, with a small gasp, she collapsed back in her chair, her body limp. For a terrifying moment, I thought she had fainted, dead away, but her eyes flickered, still conscious, just drained like a puppet with cut strings. The sight stirred no sympathy in me. The collapse was not the collapse of a victim, but the unmasking of a fraud. Harold spoke then, his voice calm but edged with steel. "This is what desperation does. It makes people justify the unforgivable. But make no mistake, what was planned here was theft, fraud, and emotional abuse. Mrs. Collins deserves more than apologies. She deserves justice." I swallowed hard, the truth of his words cutting deep. Yes, I thought. Justice, not pity. Harris leaned forward, placing a steady hand on the table. "Vanessa Collins," he said formally, "you are under investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of estate assets. You will be taken in for questioning." He turned his gaze on Lowe. "And you, sir, may want to consider your own attorney." Lowe sputtered, face pale. "Detective, this is absurd. I am a respected member of this firm. We were simply following client instructions." Harold barked a short, bitter laugh. "Instructions? You forged signatures, altered medical records, and pocketed $75,000 in illegal fees. I was there. I saw it. Your respectability won't save you now. The second officer stepped closer, handcuffs glinting at his belt. Lowe raised his hands instinctively like a man already seeing his career crumble. Vanessa whimpered again, her voice barely audible. "Daniel, please don't let them take me." Daniel shook his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. "I can't stop them, Vanessa. I wouldn't even if I could. You did this. You destroyed us." My heart twisted as I watched my son grieve. Not just his father's death, but the death of his marriage, the death of trust, the death of innocence. I wanted to comfort him, but this was his pain to carry, born of choices he hadn't made, but had ignored. Harris turned to me. "Mrs. Collins, do you wish to press formal charges?" My throat tightened. The room seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa stared at me with wide, wet eyes, silently begging, her face a portrait of ruin. Daniel looked at me with sorrow, as though my answer would decide not just Vanessa's fate, but his own. I closed my eyes for a moment and heard Richard's voice, strong and certain. "Do not let them rewrite your story. Do not let them steal your dignity." When I opened my eyes, my decision was clear. "Yes, detective," I said firmly. "I want full charges filed." Vanessa let out a keening cry, slumping lower, her body shaking. Loa's shoulders sagged, his fight gone. Harris nodded, signaling the officers. As they moved forward, Vanessa whispered one last desperate plea. "I loved him, Margaret. I loved Richard, too. I only wanted to save us." Rage surged hot in my chest, and I leaned forward, my voice low, sharp as glass. "You don't speak his name. You don't deserve to. He trusted me, and you tried to erase that trust with lies. Love does not destroy. Love does not forge. Love does not steal." The officers pulled her to her feet, her sobs echoing against the conference room walls. Lowe was escorted next, his face blank, the mask of a man who knew his career. His life was over. The door closed behind them, leaving the air heavy but clear. Daniel stood trembling, his face buried in his hands. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I let her convince me. I let her twist me. I doubted you." His shoulders shook with sobs, the sound raw, childlike. I stood slowly, walking to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You are my son," I whispered. "And though you let," her voice grow louder, "you are still my son." "But trust must be rebuilt, Daniel." He nodded, choking on his tears. "I will rebuild it, Mom. I promise you." The words felt fragile, but they were seeds. Seeds of something that might grow again if tended with care and truth. Harold cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Collins, we'll need to prepare for depositions hearings." This was just the beginning. I looked at him, gratitude flooding me. "Harold, you saved me. You saved Richard's legacy." His weathered face softened. "No, ma'am. You saved yourself. I just gave you the chance." I sat again, my body weary, but my spirit alive with fire. The climax of their plot had come and gone, and they had fallen under the weight of their own greed. For the first time in months, I felt Richard's presence not as a hollow absence, but as a steady reassurance. They tried to strip me of dignity, of trust, of his last gift to me. But they failed. The days after the confrontation blurred into a relentless sequence of phone calls, police interviews, and endless paperwork. I found myself in Detective Harris's office more than in my own home, signing statements, reviewing documents, recounting every conversation I could remember with Vanessa and the lawyers. Each retelling hurt, reopening wounds, but Harris assured me every detail mattered. "We will build this case brick by brick," he said. "And when we're done, they won't be able to wriggle free." Harold was by my side often, his presence both surprising and comforting. He provided more files, notes he had taken during his years at Carter and Lowe Records of questionable dealings that painted a broader picture of corruption. What Vanessa and Lowe tried with me was not an isolated act, but part of a pattern. The realization chilled me, but it also strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for Richard's legacy anymore. I was fighting for truth against an entire system of greed. 3 months later, the case went to court. The courthouse loomed as intimidating as the law firm had, its columns cold, its marble unforgiving. I walked through the metal detectors with my head high, Harold beside me, Daniel trailing behind, pale and shaken, but determined to stand with me this time. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and old paper. The judge, a stern woman with iron gray hair, presided with eyes that missed nothing. The prosecutor laid out the charges with precision: forgery, fraud, conspiracy to defraud an estate. They displayed the forged documents, the falsified medical reports, the invoices of payment. They played recordings Harold had secretly made of conversations with Carter before he was fired. Piece by piece, the web of lies was dismantled before the court. Vanessa sat at the defense table dressed in a plain navy dress, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. The confident young woman I once knew was gone, replaced by someone diminished, hollow. She avoided my gaze. Her shoulders hunched, her hands twisting tissues into pulp. Lowe looked worse, sweat beading on his forehead, his lawyer whispering furiously in his ear. When it was Vanessa's turn to speak, her voice cracked as she told the jury about debt desperation, fear of losing everything. She tried to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, a wife trying to save her husband's future. But the prosecutor cut through it cleanly. Saving your husband does not justify forging documents. Protecting your marriage does not justify destroying your mother-in-law's reputation. And desperation does not excuse criminal fraud. The words landed like hammer blows. Daniel was called as a witness. My heart ached as he walked to the stand, his shoulders slumped under the weight of shame. His testimony was halting at first, but then it poured out how Vanessa had whispered doubts about me, how she made him believe I was slipping into confusion, how he trusted her so much he ignored his own instincts. Tears streaked his face as he admitted, "I doubted my mother when she needed me most. I believed lies instead of love." I watched him torn between sorrow and pride. His confession was painful, but it was truth, and truth was the beginning of redemption. When I took the stand, the courtroom was so silent I could hear my heartbeat. I told them about Richard's meticulous planning about our conversations late at night, when he assured me he wanted me to manage everything. I told them how it felt to read words in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, claiming I was unfit, how it cut deeper than any wound. And I told them about the moment Harold stopped me in the garage, a stranger risking everything to bring me the truth. When I finished, the judge nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, but I saw a flicker of something human in her eyes. Respect. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. Lowe was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, his reputation in ruins, his license to practice law revoked permanently. His associate Carter received 18 months. Vanessa, because she eventually cooperated and confessed to forging statements, received 5 years of probation, 600 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for all legal fees tied to the fraud. She avoided prison, but her name was stained, her marriage fractured beyond repair. When the sentence was read, she collapsed into her chair, sobbing quietly. I felt no joy in it, only a grim satisfaction. Justice wasn't about gloating. It was about balance restored. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. I ignored them, walking past with Harold and Daniel. For me, the story was not for public spectacle. It was private, painful, and sacred. Daniel moved into a small apartment downtown shortly after. The house in Westfield was sold, the cars repossessed, the debts exposed for what they were. He worked long hours trying to rebuild his consulting business, this time without illusions or Vanessa's constant influence. Our relationship was strained, scarred by what had happened, but we met once a week for coffee, trying to mend piece by piece. Sometimes he apologized again, voice breaking. Sometimes I let the silence answer, because forgiveness is not a one-time gift, but a daily decision. I kept boundaries. I refused to pay his debts, refused to rescue him from the consequences of choices he had ignored. That was Richard's lesson. Love does not mean enabling. Love means standing firm even when it hurts. Vanessa disappeared from our lives after sentencing. I heard she volunteered at a community center as part of her probation scrubbing floors, teaching literacy classes, humbled in ways she had never been before. Part of me hoped she would learn something from the fall, but I also knew she would never again be welcome in my home. The trust had been shattered too completely. At night, when the house was quiet, I sometimes sat in Richard's chair by the fireplace, sipping tea, staring at the fading photographs on the mantel. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything he worked for. Not the money, but the dignity, the respect, the trust he left in my hands. If Harold hadn't spoken, if I had signed those papers, I would have been reduced to a dependent, a shadow of myself. That knowledge made me shiver, but it also made me stronger. I had faced betrayal and survived. I had faced lies and unearthed the truth. And I had faced the collapse of family and chosen dignity over silence. That I realized was the true inheritance. Richard left me, not wealth, but the courage to protect myself when the people closest to me turned into enemies. 8 months later, spring sunlight spilled across my garden in Cleveland, warming the roses Richard and I had planted for our 20th anniversary. Their blooms were full pink and fragrant, a reminder that life could renew itself even after a long winter. I sat on the porch with a mug of tea, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes down the street, their laughter drifting in the breeze. For the first time since Richard's passing, I felt something close to peace. It had not come easily. The trial, the betrayals, the endless questions had worn me down, left me raw. But time, truth, and choice had slowly stitched the pieces together. Daniel visited me that morning carrying a bag of groceries. He looked healthier than he had in years, his shoulders squared, his eyes clear. He had sold his luxury car, traded it for an old Toyota, and was rebuilding his consulting business from the ground up. It was slow, grueling work, but it was honest. He sat with me on the porch, sipping coffee, staring at the garden. "I think about Dad every day," he said quietly. I nodded. So do I. He was silent for a long moment, then asked the question he had been carrying for months. "Mom, can you forgive me? Not just say the words, but really forgive me for doubting you, for letting her voice matter more than yours." I reached for his hand, squeezing it. "Forgiveness isn't one moment, Daniel. It's a choice over and over again. And yes, I forgive you, because I know you were manipulated, and because I see the man you're becoming now." His eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't only sorrow, they were relief. He whispered, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled faintly. "Thank yourself. You're the one doing the hard work now." Across the yard, Harold appeared, walking up the driveway with his usual slow gait, carrying a stack of folders. He had become a fixture in my life, working with me part-time on small real estate projects and teaching classes at the community center. From living in his car to finding purpose again, he had rebuilt his life too. "Morning, Mrs. Collins," he greeted, setting the folders down. "I thought you might want to review these investment updates." I smiled, gesturing to a chair. "Sit, Harold. Have some tea." He settled in his weathered face, relaxing in the sun. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I stopped you in that garage, I wasn't sure you'd believe me. Most people would have brushed me off. But you didn't. You listened. That choice saved everything." I looked out at the roses, their blooms swaying in the breeze. "No, Harold," I said softly. "You saved me. Richard left me trust, but you gave me truth when I needed it most." Harold shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Truth deserves to be spoken. Silence only helps the liars." His words sank deep. They reminded me why I had started volunteering at the senior center, teaching financial literacy to widows and retirees, showing them how to protect themselves from schemes, how to recognize manipulation. If my story could prevent even one woman from being tricked, then Richard's legacy lived on, not just in me, but in others. Sometimes I heard whispers about Vanessa. People said she worked quietly at the community center, fulfilling her probation, scrubbing floors, helping with literacy classes. I never saw her, but Harold did. He said she worked hard, silent, humbled. Did she regret it? Did she understand the devastation she had caused? I didn't know. And in the end, it didn't matter. She no longer had a place in my life. Forgiveness was not the same as trust, and trust once shattered could not be rebuilt with community service hours. As the afternoon light shifted, I leaned back in my chair, the warmth of the sun on my face, the sound of laughter in the distance. My world was quieter now. Smaller perhaps, but steadier. I had lost Richard, but I had kept his trust. I had nearly lost my dignity, but I had reclaimed it. I had been betrayed, but I had chosen not to let betrayal define me. The greatest inheritance, I realized, was not money or property. It was the strength to stand firm when others tried to take what was mine, the courage to see lies for what they were, and the wisdom to rebuild life with truth. I lifted my mug, whispering into the breeze, "We did it, Richard. We made it through." The roses rustled as though in answer, their petals glowing in the light of the setting sun. And in that moment, I felt free. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me the city you're watching from. I love to see how far these stories travel.